Well, happy Thanksgiving to all of you, and welcome to a Stonemont Thanksgiving. I hope you all have a good day planned ahead for you, or maybe by the time you see that this is behind you, will be able or were able to spend it with friends and family, doing those things that are important, understanding the importance of this holiday and the true meaning of this holiday. It's not about watching football games. Are there still football games on Thanksgiving? I don't know. I don't keep track of that kind of stuff. The last couple of Thanksgivings, I have read a scene from my second book, The Revival. It's about a Stonemont Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving at Stonemont, the first year after the collapse and after they were able to rebuild. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Stonemont series or haven't read them, I'll bring you up to kind of speed before I read this section. There was a collapse of the whole world. It was a CME. Everything went down. One family, the Wyatt family, was prepared. They had been prepared for this, for whatever kind of collapse. And when it happened, they were able not only to survive very well, not scratching in the dirt, but survive very well, and provide a haven to which others could come, working together, live safely, and rebuild a kind of community. In addition to the original family home, they were able to build cabins around the compound around the original house. They had built a kind of a grand hall, a meeting hall in the middle. As this community grew bigger and bigger, there needed to be, and I go into a lot of detail on this in the books, I won't have to go into detail with us, but it has become quite a community. The scene, as we would start here, I'll kind of introduce it. They are writing, this is after Thanksgiving, but Jim Wyatt is going to reflect on the previous day, on the Thanksgiving celebration. And they're writing to another home where they've heard somebody needs some help, and this is where we join them. This is chapter 2 in the Revival. Steam blew from the horses' nostrils as they rode through the woods, the temperature having dropped into the 20s overnight, and the blowing, the sounds of the horses' hooves, and the creaking of saddle leather were the only noises that intruded on the silence of the early morning. The celebration the night before had been everything they had intended it to be. More, really, resembling medieval feasts from the movies combined with the glow and quiet of a true American Thanksgiving. Eschewing the modernity of even the low-voltage lighting, the hall had been lit by 2 massive fireplaces and hundreds of candles mounted in wall sconces and candelabra on the long tables, filling the hall with the warm light of controlled fire. The tables had groaned under the weight of the turkeys, quail, pheasant, venison, hams, and beef roasts, many of which had been cooked in the hall's fireplaces, creating an unbelievable aroma, as well as the squash, potato dishes, and vegetables prepared from the yield of the Stonemont gardens, and apple, cherry, and peach pies from the Stonemont orchards. The atmosphere had been a combination of joyful celebration and deep thankfulness, as no doubt the first Thanksgiving had been, and the feeling of community had evolved to a palpable level by the time Jim had risen from his chair to speak. He had stood quietly as he waited for the room to see him, and calmed to near silence, then reached into his pocket and withdrew the slip of paper on which he had copied some lines from the green folder in his den. He had taken a moment to scan the hall, looking at the faces turned toward him, and thinking of what each of them had gone through in the preceding months. Then he began. I was reading through some of our old family history earlier today, and I came across a passage describing one of our branches who came from Switzerland and settled in Virginia during the early 1700s. It struck me that our time is in some ways similar. I think you will see the relevance. He had put on his glasses and begun to read. I'll interject something here. What I'm about to read here is verbatim. It's from a piece of paper. It's from a journal that did come from my family. So what I've put here, it did come from my family back in the 1700s. At that time, this section was a wilderness. Deer roamed through the forests, and the streams abounded in fish, ducks, and geese. Wild and dangerous beasts were plentiful. They were schooled in the hardships of pioneer times. They felled the giant oak and erected their log cabin in the wild woodlands. They preferred such an environment in a land dedicated to religious and political freedom rather than to suffer persecution in their native land. He had paused, taking off his glasses, and surveyed the silent faces looking back at him. We are in a new wilderness, and dangerous beasts are again plentiful, though most of them are two-legged. We are becoming schooled in a new kind of pioneer life, and we felled the trees to build our cabins. But more than any of that, we can see the greatest parallel in their preference to live their lives in a land dedicated to religious and political freedom, rather than to suffer under persecution in what their native countries had become. The hall remained silent, and he continued. Many of us have said that the country we grew up in had ceased to exist long before the collapse. The America that valued liberty, virtue, morality, hard work, and self-reliance had devolved into a semi-socialist state of coddled, dependent, incompetent, politically correct crybabies who were offended by anything with which they disagreed, and who, by their sheer numbers and political influence, were able to stifle and control the producing class which had done most of the work to support them, consequently driving our once great country into a chaotic decline. He had paused for a moment, noting the many who nodded in affirmation of what he had said. The collapse returned us to a reset point, a point from which it may be possible to rebuild the America we once knew. Whether we will be able to do this will depend on a number of things, some of which will be beyond our control, but we must concentrate on and dedicate our efforts to those areas over which we do have control. We must build the future we want our children to live in. Sounds of approval came from the crowd, and he continued. Patrick Henry said that virtue, morality, and religion are the great pillars of government, and were the armor that made our country invincible in its early days. John Adams said that the U.S. Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, and that it was wholly inadequate for the government of any other. There can be no argument that those pillars cracked and crumbled in later years, or that the moral and religious underpinnings of our country dissolved in a culture increasingly consumed with self and celebrity worship. As Abraham Lincoln, Douglas MacArthur, and many others warned us, the nation which could not be defeated from without was eventually weakened and defeated from within. He had paused again, knowing that what he was about to say was perhaps the most important thing he had said at Stonemont, perhaps the most important thing he would ever say. With this in mind, and in the belief that the country we grew up in no longer exists, I hereby dedicate and consecrate this Thanksgiving and all subsequent Thanksgivings to God, who blessed the efforts of America's original founders and who we now ask to bless our own. I further declare Stonemont from this time forward to be autonomous, independent, and sovereign, apart from all others, subordinate to none, subject only to God and God's laws as we feel them written in our hearts. He had looked out over the gathering, his gaze encompassing all those in the hall. I do not know what path other groups or communities will decide to take. I'm sure there will be different ideas and positions, but this is the path we will take. May those who choose to reside at Stonemont, whether here or in any Stonemont community, do so in respect, cooperation, and Christian charity. May those who visit Stonemont find it to be a safe harbor and welcoming friend. May those who seek deliverance from oppression find Stonemont a refuge and a staunch protector. And may those who seek to victimize or oppress their fellow man find Stonemont to be an unyielding and unwavering foe. He had taken a moment to allow his words to settle, then spoke more quietly to the silent room. Stonemont will become a seed of a new American dream. We will leave it to God to determine where that dream leads us. The room had remained silent for a moment. Then a man in the middle of the hall had risen to his feet and stood as if at attention. After a few more seconds, another man rose, then another and another. In a silence marred only by the scuffling of chairs and the shuffling of feet, people rose through the hall until every person was standing. Then a voice in the back had begun to softly sing America, at first alone in the otherwise silent hall, then slowly joined by others until every voice in the room had become a part of the chorus that sang of a treasured past and hope for the future. Well, that is the Stonemont Thanksgiving. I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope that some of it meant something to you. We're going over here in a bit. If you heard sound in the background, that's Kelly preparing food to take over to another family home. This year is her oldest brother's turn to host Thanksgiving. We're looking forward to that. It'll be a day shared with family and friends and reflecting on the true meaning of Thanksgiving, thanking God for his many blessings and asking him for his continued direction. I hope you all, and I wish you all, a very happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.